The whetstone had belonged to his father, and before that, to his father's father, worn to roughly half its original thickness by decades of use. Cale didn't know anymore if sharpening helped him sleep or merely gave his hands something to do in the hours when sleep refused to come. He suspected the answer was the latter, but the motion had become its own kind of prayer. Draw, tilt, drawn prayers, he had found, rarely needed to be examined too closely to do their work. He lived at the edge of Ashford, which was itself at the edge of everything else. The town had 2 streets, one well, a mill that worked half the year, and a tavern that worked all of it. The forests began where the last fence ended, and in late autumn, when the first frost silvered the mud and stripped the oaks down to bare architecture, the edge of the world felt closer than usual. Cale had chosen this place for that reason, though he wouldn't have said so to anyone. A man could only be found if someone was looking for him, and Ashford was the kind of place people didn't look. He repaired things, fences, cartwheels, the occasional beam that had given up under the weight of another season. The work was honest and asked nothing of him except the effort of his hands. He rose before the town did, worked until the light failed, and returned home to his small house with its single chair and its single lamp and its whetstone on the table by the window. He had a bed, a hearth, a hook for his coat, and a sword he hadn't drawn in 3 years. The sword hung above the door like an afterthought, not displayed, not hidden, just present in the way that certain things are present when you no longer know what to do with them but can't bring yourself to be rid of them. It had been his father's sword. Before that, someone else's. The steel was old work, dark at the fuller with a pattern that looked almost like water moving, and the grip had been rewrapped so many times that the wood beneath was smooth as river stone. Cale sharpened it out of habit, the same way he swept the step and banked the fire. It was maintenance, not intention. He was careful about the difference. The town knew he'd been a soldier. They didn't ask. He didn't offer. There are places in the world where a man can arrive already, finished already, whatever he's going to be, and Ashford was one of them. The blacksmith's wife brought him bread sometimes. The miller's son asked about the fence near the western pasture. Life had a rhythm to it, small and repetitive and quiet enough that he could almost forget, for hours at a time, the shape of what had been taken from him. Davith had been his friend since they were 17 years old. They had learned to march together, to sleep in mud together, to make each other laugh at things that weren't funny because laughing was better than the alternative. They had shared rations and bad news and the specific black humor of men who have been frightened too many times to be frightened simply anymore. When Davith was sick in the 3rd winter, Cale sat with him through 3 nights and told him stories about a future they would probably have. When the pass was held and they were all still alive, Davith had laughed so hard he'd cried and said Cale owed him a drink for the rest of his life. Cale had agreed. He'd been sincere about it. When the order came, hold the bridge, take the hill, whatever forgettable piece of strategy had been worth Davith's life, Cale had followed it. He had been a good soldier. Good soldiers followed orders. The commander's logic was sound. The numbers worked out. The position was held. None of this was wrong, technically, and technically was the word that visited him at 3 in the morning when sleep went somewhere else, and he was left alone with the arithmetic of survival. He had been following an order given by a man he had trusted. Not blindly, he had trusted the logic, the map, the assessment of necessary losses. He had been a professional. He had done the right thing professionally, and it had cost him the person he'd drink for the rest of his life. And there was no version of that sentence that ended cleanly. He had survived. Davith had not. And somewhere between that bridge and this chair, Cale had arrived at the conclusion that he did not particularly deserve the difference, only that he had to go on existing in spite of it, because the alternative required more decision than he was willing to make. He had come to Ashford because no one here remembered him as a soldier. No one's face would go careful and managed when he walked in a room. No one would set down their cup and say nothing, which was somehow worse than being spoken to directly. The whetstone was nearly half gone. He ran his thumb along the stone's edge in the dark and thought about nothing in particular, and outside, the first frost of autumn settled over Ashford like something that had been waiting for permission. She came in from the west on a Thursday. The tavern was full by Ashford standards, which meant 11 men, a dog, and a fire that had opinions about the draft. Cale was there because Emmerich, the barman, owed him 4 coppers for a wagon repair and paid in ale rather than coin, which was not ideal, but Cale had no particular plans for the evening. He sat near the fire, working through his first cup, not speaking to anyone, which suited everyone involved. Emmerich was a good-natured man who had been behind his bar for 30 years and had acquired in that time the particular confidence of a person who has never left a room where everyone eventually relaxes around them. He moved between his patrons with the ease of someone who believed fundamentally that people wanted to be spoken to. He was, Cale had always thought, almost entirely right about this, almost. The door opened. She had to duck slightly to enter, which she did without slowing, and the room shifted in the way rooms shift when something significantly larger than expected arrives in them. Vara was tall even for an orc. Broad-shouldered, built like someone who had spent years doing exactly what she was about to make obvious, with gray-green skin and a face that wore high cheekbones and a faint scar through her left eyebrow, with equal disregard for what anyone thought of either. Her armor was well-made but travel-worn, the leather darkened at the shoulder plates, the straps showing men's that had been made in the field with what was available, and made well regardless. At her hip, a sword that caught the firelight in a way that made several men look at it twice. She filled the doorway, and then she crossed into the room and she filled that too, not through size alone, but through something in how she moved, like a woman who had decided some years ago to occupy whatever space she was in completely, and had not since revised the decision. She walked to the bar and set down coin without consulting the posted prices. "Food," she said, "whatever's hot." Emmerich looked at the coin, then at her, then processed both at his usual thoughtful pace. "Right," he said, and turned to the pot. The whispering started quietly and built, the way fires build. Someone had seen her before, or knew someone who had, or claimed they had, which amounted to the same thing in a tavern in an evening. The name moved around the room in pieces, passed from mouth to ear like something being carefully reassembled. Vara, the great swordswoman, undefeated, the blade that had never broken, heard she killed a stone troll in the pass above Marine with 2 cuts. Heard she once took a contract for a warlord and then declined his second offer in a way that required a new warlord. The stories had the quality of all good stories, which is to say that they were probably half true and 3 times the size of the original event. The room arranged itself around her the way rooms arrange themselves around something large and potentially dangerous. Maintaining distance, but not too obviously. Vara heard all of it. She ate her food and did not acknowledge any of it, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. She let the whispers run their course, and when Emmerich came back with more bread and said, with the over-familiar warmth of a man who had never had occasion to fear a conversation, "So is it true about the stone troll?" She looked at him with a particular expression that experienced practitioners of violence use when explaining something to someone who has never needed to know it. "Don't ask questions to people you don't know," she said. Emmerich, who was good-natured and not particularly quick, laughed as though this were a joke. "Just making conversation," he said. "Not every day we get a famous—" "I didn't ask for your conversation." The room went the specific kind of quiet that follows a cold statement from a large, armed person. Emmerich's smile stayed on his face a moment past its usefulness, then retreated. He had the grace to look embarrassed. It was in his hands, in the angle of his head, and Cale, watching, felt something in him that wasn't exactly sympathy but was adjacent to it. Emmerich was a man who believed in his bones that people wanted warmth, and he was being told, by someone who clearly had been told this before and had stopped caring, that he was wrong. "Fair enough," Emmerich said. "Fair enough." One of the men near the back called out, "No need for that," in the tone that men use when they want to make a point from a safe distance. Vara turned her head slowly toward the voice, and the man at the back found his drink suddenly fascinating. The room settled again. Then she swept a look across it, the kind of look that accounts for exits and threats and the relative position of everyone present, and her gaze stopped on Cale. He met it. He hadn't planned to. It was simply how he was built. He had been in enough rooms where looking away at the wrong moment had consequences, and the instinct remained even when it was no longer strictly necessary. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and something moved through the room like a current, or perhaps nothing moved at all, and everyone simply held their breath for a moment. "You," she said. He waited. "What are you staring at?" "Nothing," he said, which was true in the sense that he'd been looking without particularly seeing, the way a man sits near a fire and watches the flames without thinking about combustion. Then look somewhere else. He considered this and found he had nothing against the suggestion in principle, but something in the way she said it. The same way she'd spoken to Emmerich, with that practiced flatness, testing whether the world would rearrange itself around her, made him stay still, not out of stubbornness exactly. More out of the clear-eyed recognition that rearranging wasn't actually called for. "I'm fine where I am," he said. The quiet that followed was a different variety from the previous one, not the surprised quiet of a cold statement, but the anticipatory quiet of something arriving at speed. Vara set down her cup. "You want to repeat that?" "I wasn't speaking quietly," Cale said. Several men near the door found their boots suddenly worth examining. Emmerich had backed to the far end of the bar and appeared to be weighing his options. The dog got up from its spot by the fire and relocated to near the window, which showed better judgment than everyone else present combined. "Who are you?" she said. "To speak to me that way?" "Someone who's finished his ale and would like to finish it in peace." "Who are you?" She said it again, not louder, but differently, not asking for a name, asking for a category. What kind of man is this, and should I treat him accordingly? It was a soldier's question, Cale recognized. He had asked it himself. "Nobody," he said, which is probably why I don't care. It wasn't heroism. He was tired and warm, and he had approximately 3 more sips of ale, and he did not feel like moving. He had also been in enough confrontations to know the difference between someone who was a threat and someone who needed witnesses. Someone who required the room to be afraid of her because the room's fear was doing some work she needed done. Vara was the latter. He had no particular name for what he saw in her. He only knew that it was familiar, the way one type of wound recognizes another. What happened next happened quickly and, in retrospect, with the inevitability of things that were always going to happen, given the people involved. She told him he should leave. He said he'd paid for his seat. She told him he didn't know who he was talking to. He said it didn't change much for him either way. She said slowly and with great clarity that she would be happy to demonstrate the difference between a famous swordswoman and a frontier nobody. He said, with equal clarity, that he suspected she would be. The challenge came out of her mouth before she'd finished the sentence formal words, a raised cup, the old phrasing that was still recognized even in a border town at the edge of the forest. A duel, the oak at the top of the hill. Dawn. The room erupted in the way that rooms erupt when something foolish and unavoidable has been announced. 3 men spoke to Cale at once, overlapping. One of them grabbed his arm. Emmerich came back from the end of the bar with what appeared to be a prepared speech about property damage and the town's reputation. Everyone had advice. Everyone had reasons. Everyone was eager to supply arguments for the position that he should not do this. The word suicide appeared in 2 separate murmured conversations simultaneously, and someone at the back said something about the stone troll that contained the word actual in an emphatic position. Cale listened to all of it. Then he said, "Fine. Tomorrow," and finished his ale. The oak stood on the low hill at the edge of the grazing fields, bare of leaves, wide as 2 men standing with arms outstretched, its roots pushing up through the frost-hardened ground, like old arguments that had been going on too long to stop now. It was the oldest thing in Ashford by a significant margin, and had the look of something that had watched too much history, and arrived eventually at a kind of heavy indifference. No one sat beneath it in summer. It was not an unfriendly tree exactly, more like a presence that had grown too large for friendliness to apply to it in the usual sense. The frost had held overnight. The mud was hard and grey, the sky the pale color of early morning before it decides what to be. Cale's breath came in visible puffs as he walked up the hill, sword at his hip, coat open against the cold that he didn't feel yet. He'd been awake since before first light, not from nerves, but from the habit of early rising he had never been able to shake, and he had sharpened the blade before he came. He did not know why. He usually did. She was there before him. She was loosening her shoulders in the grey morning light, the long sword already unsheathed and resting across her forearm, with the ease of something she'd done 10,000 times, her back to him. She did not turn when she heard his footsteps on the frost, only continued the movement until she'd finished it with the focus of someone who does not interrupt her own preparations for anything short of an active emergency. Then she let the blade drop to the ready position and turned. "I thought you'd run," she said. Her tone was almost curious, a genuine assessment, not mockery. "Human, that you're here is something." He said nothing. He drew his sword. She looked at it. Something crossed her face quickly, carefully controlled, but he saw it. A flicker of recognition that wasn't complete, like a word on the tip of the tongue, like a language half remembered. Her eyes moved across the fuller, tracking the pattern in the steel, and for a fraction of a second she was somewhere else entirely. "Where did you get that?" she asked. The question came out with a sharpness that had nothing to do with the coming duel. The pattern caught the early light, the watermark dark and clear in the grey winter morning. He had never thought much about it. It had always been there. Part of what the sword was, the way a knot in wood is part of what wood is. "Ready," he said. She set her jaw and raised her blade. They fought well. He had expected her to be good, and she exceeded his expectations in the specific, concrete way that matters in an actual fight, rather than a theoretical one. She was fast for her size, faster than she had any right to be with that reach and those shoulders, and her technique was layered in a way that spoke to training from more than one tradition. She had a preference for pressure, advancing rather than waiting, using her reach and strength to close the space and make defense expensive. He had less of both, and spent the first two exchanges giving ground he didn't particularly want to give, working out the rhythm of her approach, finding the pattern underneath the improvisation. She was almost better than him. He felt this clearly, without distress or particular drama. It was simply information, the way the condition of ice underfoot is information. She was better than him today. In this field, in this cold, with her blade at its best and her mind sharp with purpose. He fought carefully and she pressed him hard, and there were several moments where the outcome was genuinely open. One combination drove him back 3 steps, and the second step caught ice, and he felt his balance go, saw her recognize the opening. And then he turned. He let the motion carry him rather than fighting it, pivoting into the slide, and brought the old sword in on an angle she hadn't expected because she'd been watching for a recovery, not an attack. He caught her blade mid-sweep. The sound was wrong. Metal doesn't shatter like that often. It requires specific conditions, a flaw in the steel, a stress point accumulated over years of hard use, a particular angle of impact that the blade was not made to absorb. Her sword made a sound like a sentence ending abruptly, definitively, and the top third of it fell into the frost-stiff grass and lay there among the dead stems, glinting mildly in the weak morning light, as though surprised by its own presence there. Vara stood with the shortened blade in her hand. She looked at it for a long moment. Her expression did not collapse. It was not that kind of face. And this was not that kind of woman. Something moved through it that was not quite grief and not quite shock. Something recognizing itself. Her free hand moved to the brake without her deciding to. Fingers finding the sheared edge, then going still. She looked at the broken piece of blade in the grass, and then she went down on one knee. Not falling deliberately, a controlled descent, a choice. And looked at the ground in front of her and said, "Finish it." Silence. He looked at her. He thought about several things in the space of a few seconds, about David, about orders followed and what they cost, about the particular weight of decisive moments and what they require of the person inside them. He thought about the room at the tavern and the way the whispers had moved around her like something she needed, not wanted, needed, and about the look on her face when she'd seen the pattern on his blade. He slid the sword home. He turned and walked back down the hill. He heard her behind him before he'd crossed into the lower field. Not running, she was not, he already understood, the kind of woman who ran after things, but moving with purpose, her stride long and unhurried and steady in the way of someone who has decided to catch up and is confident she will. He slowed, not because he was uncertain, but because he was curious and because something in the morning had shifted in a way he couldn't name yet, like a door he hadn't known was there turning out to be unlocked. She came up beside him and walked in silence for 20 steps, which was a substantial distance to carry something that was clearly trying to come out. He waited. He had learned to wait. He had learned that patience was the most functional thing he had access to in situations where everything else was unclear. "The pattern," she said finally. "On the blade." He kept walking. "Where did you get it?" "I told you, my father's." "Your father was a swordsmith?" "My father was a farmer. His father was a soldier. The sword has been in the family longer than anyone's tracked." He paused. 5 generations at least. She was quiet for 10 more steps. He could feel her organizing something, deciding what to release and what to keep. He recognized the process. He had lived in it himself long enough to identify it in others. "In my people's history," she said, "there is a story, very old, about a mountain and a dragon and a smith who worked with ore that came from the dragon's hoard. Not taken, given freely. The dragon had no use for iron. The smith made 3 swords from that ore, each one different. The legend says they cannot be destroyed by ordinary means." A pause. "Only by each other." He considered this. "Your sword was one of them. I believe so." She said it without apology, without the defensive addition of caveats and qualifications that a person uses when they expect to be laughed at. She had been living with this certainty long enough that she no longer needed it to be validated. "I've been looking for the other 2 for 11 years. And mine." She didn't answer immediately. The pattern matches what was described in the oldest accounts. The old texts called it the watermark, not a decoration, something in the forging. The way the ore moved in the fire. A pause. "My clan called it a waste of time. Said I was chasing old women's stories instead of serving. They were not wrong that I was chasing something." The dry note in her voice was unexpected, not self-pity. Something drier than that, more like a person who has been through enough to find their own situation intermittently absurd. He almost smiled. "So," he said, "what do you want?" She walked for a while longer without answering. The town was visible below them now, smoke beginning to rise from the first chimneys, the day assembling itself. The oak was behind them on the hill, small with distance. "Your family forms," she said. "The techniques that came with a sword. I know my tradition's approach. If yours has been preserved even partially, even imperfectly, there may be things you do correctly that you don't know the reason for." She stopped walking. He stopped too, and they stood in the field with the frost crunching softly underfoot and the broken piece of her blade still up on the hill somewhere. And she said, "I'll trade you. Your family forms for mine. 2 weeks. Techniques only. I want to understand what the swords were made to do together." A beat. No obligation past the terms. He looked at her. She looked back. Her expression was careful and direct. Not cold, but not soft either. Someone who had learned to ask for things precisely because imprecision led to disappointment. He thought about his house, its single chair, the particular quality of its quiet, the shape of 2 weeks and what it might hold versus what it presently did. "You need a place to stay," he said. She said nothing, which was an answer. "My spare room is a closet with a mattress. That's sufficient. I don't cook much. I cook less." They walked back to town in the thin morning light, not speaking, and behind them the ancient oak stood alone on the hill, stripped of everything, watching as it had always watched, with the patience of something too old to be in a hurry about anything. The first 2 days were approximately what Cale had expected them to be, which was functional and tense in the way that happens when 2 people accustomed to solitude are suddenly sharing a space neither of them was built for company in. She was quiet, which helped considerably. She occupied the spare room, correctly described as a closet with a mattress, neither apologetically nor with complaint, and emerged each morning already dressed and already present in the full sense of the word, which meant he did not have to negotiate the particular awkwardness of someone else's gradual arrival into consciousness. They trained in the yard behind the house in the mornings, which was large enough for the purpose and private enough to avoid the town's comment, with the cold air turning their breath white and the frost-hardened mud solid and even underfoot. She showed him the forms of her tradition, older than his, structured differently, built on a philosophy of the body as lever and fulcrum rather than battering ram. The foundation was stillness. Movement came from stillness, and the opponent's force was redirected rather than absorbed or countered. He was a good student in the way that men who have learned to pay attention through necessity are good at most things. He watched carefully, replicated as precisely as he could, let the corrections land without pride getting in the way. She taught precisely and without excess. When he was wrong, she demonstrated the correction once, clearly, without commentary on the error or its frequency, or what it suggested about his previous training. He appreciated this more than he expected to. He had known teachers who made the correction feel like a verdict. He showed her his family's forms in return, which were harder to explain because he had learned them by watching his father and grandfather, and through the muscle memory that comes from observation over years rather than instruction. He could execute them correctly. He could not always articulate why. She asked the right questions. What is this hand doing? What does the weight do here? What does this guard open, and what does it protect? And between the questions and his attempts to answer them, working backward from the motion to the reasoning, they arrived together at an understanding that neither of them had possessed alone. The second day she corrected him 9 times. The third day, 4. By the end of the first week, the corrections were rare and each one was interesting. Not fixing errors of carelessness, but excavating technique buried under years of approximation. He had learned this sword in pieces, catching what he could from watching his father in a crowded barn, from the few times the old man had put his hands over his and moved them to where they needed to be without explaining why. What he had received was partial and imperfect and genuinely his, and Var treated it that way, as something real that needed clarifying rather than replacing. She was harder to read in her own learning. She executed the forms quickly and cleanly, because she was an exceptional practitioner, and the physical execution came easily to her. The difficulty was subtler. These forms had been built for a different sword, a different oar, a different set of assumptions about what the blade would do under specific pressures, and her body kept defaulting to her own tradition's logic when the situations overlapped. He would watch her work through a sequence and see the slight hesitation, a fraction of a second where the old pattern asserted itself. And he would say, "Again," and she would, and by the 3rd or 4th repetition, the new pattern would hold, and her face would go briefly still with recognition. He liked watching that moment. He never said so. They were careful with each other's traditions. Neither treated the other's forms as inferior or subordinate or merely supplementary. They had both quietly concluded, 2 parts of something that had been designed to work together. 2 approaches built for the same steel, shaped around the same legend, separated by a century or 2 of scattered inheritance and one very long search. On the 4th day, during the morning session, he was working through a transition his body knew, but his mind kept intercepting. A shift from one guard to another that he'd been doing slightly wrong for long enough that the wrong way felt natural, and the right way felt effortful. He was running the sequence again, slower, trying to locate the fault, and then her hand was on his, adjusting the angle of his fingers with a pressure that was practical and complete, neither tentative nor forceful. He felt her pause. She had her hand on his and she went still a second, not more, and he could feel her notice what she'd done. Not the correction itself, the quality of it, the care in it. She stepped back. He held the grip where she had placed it. He moved through the form and the transition was clean, the way it was supposed to be. "There," she said. Her voice was exactly level. She turned back to her own practice. He repeated the transition twice more, watching his hand. The correction held. He said nothing. They didn't speak about the moment. The session continued, but something in the air of the yard had shifted faintly, like the change in pressure before weather arrives that you can feel in your joints before you can see it in the sky. And when they stopped for water and she handed him the cup without ceremony or commentary, he thought that they were, incrementally and by small degrees, becoming people who existed in the same space without it costing either of them anything. He wasn't sure what to do with that. He was out of practice with it. He suspected she was too, though for different reasons. The evenings settled into a pattern without anyone deciding they should. She read. She had a few books in her pack, old and much repaired, the kind of volumes that have been carried a long way by someone who considers them necessary, or cleaned and maintained her equipment with the methodical attention of someone for whom equipment has been the difference between outcomes. He sharpened things or repaired small items brought from his workshop, or sat near the fire and did nothing in the productive and practiced way of a man who had been doing nothing for long enough to be good at it. They ate together without ceremony. Whatever was simplest, prepared without discussion and eaten without performance. She ate more than he did, which he'd expected, and she ate without the self-consciousness about it that some people in unfamiliar company carried. He ate less than he should have, which she didn't comment on, but he noticed she noticed. The bread appeared more reliably after the second week. He didn't raise the subject. One evening she looked at the whetstone for a long moment while he worked with it. And then she said, without particular inflection, "That's old. My father's. His father's before that. It's nearly gone. I know." She returned to her reading. He continued working. A few minutes passed in the way that minutes pass when a conversation has found a thread and hasn't decided yet to follow it. Then she said, without looking up, "My grandmother had a stone like that. Wore it down to a sliver. Kept it anyway." A pause. "I never understood why." He turned the stone over in his hand once. He thought about answering carefully and decided that wasn't necessary. "Because at some point it stops being a tool and starts being proof," he said. She looked up. "Proof of what?" she asked. "That you kept doing the thing," he said. "That you kept going through however many years of whatever." He set the stone down on the table, not putting it away, just resting it. "It's proof that time passed and you were in it." She was quiet for a while. The fire moved. A log shifted and threw a brief shower of sparks up the chimney and then settled into steady burning again. Outside, the wind had come up, rattling the shutter latch in the small, irregular pattern that had become, over the past 2 weeks, part of the house's ambient noise. "You hold it like that," she said eventually. "Not the whetstone." She was looking at the sword above the door. "Like no one is ever supposed to see you do it." He looked at her. Her eyes were on the wall, not him. "Like it costs something every time. But you do it anyway." He didn't answer. "I've seen that in people who've lost something they can't name," she said. The statement was careful and direct and did not contain pity. "Or won't." He set the stone down on the table. "I know what it is," he said. She waited. She was, he had learned, extremely good at waiting. It was not a passive quality in her, but an active one. The waiting of someone who has learned that silence is a space that allows things to arrive that pushing would only scatter. "I had a friend," he said. The sentence came out flat and worn, the way sentences come when they've been thought so many times they've passed through the stage of wait and come out the other side into something simply true. We'd been together since we were boys, practically. Same unit, same mud, same winters, same bad luck followed by worse. He was the kind of person. He started differently. He made things bearable, not by pretending they were fine, just by being present in them. She said nothing. An order came, he said, strategically correct. The commander was not a fool. The numbers worked out. The position had to be held. Davith's unit held it. He picked up the whetstone again, not to use it, just to have something. He didn't come back from it. The fire, the shutter latch, the particular quality of silence in a house with two people in it. I followed the order, he said. I was a good soldier. Good soldiers follow the right order. I did everything correctly, and correctly cost me. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. She was quiet for a long time. Then, my people have a word for what you're describing. It means something like carrying water in a sieve. You know it won't hold. You carry it anyway because putting it down would mean accepting the loss, and accepting the loss is still... She paused. Not possible yet. He looked at the stone. That's exactly right. More silence. She asked after a while, quietly and without emphasis. Who do you mean to pass the sword to? He was still for a second too long. There's no one left, he said. It ends with me. Not bitterly. Not with the weight of someone who wanted sympathy or the lightness of someone who had made peace with it, either, just with the flatness of a thing that has been known for long enough to become furniture. He had made something like peace with it, or rather, he had made something that functioned like peace from whatever materials were available. She looked at the fire. She did not say she was sorry. She did not offer anything in exchange or in consolation or in the usual social currencies that people use to buffer hard statements. The fact sat between them in the firelight and was simply a fact, placed there, real, and she let it be real rather than trying to move it. He was grateful for this in a way he hadn't expected to be grateful for anything. The neighbor's name was Pell. He was a middle-aged man with a small holder's land 3 fields over and a reputation for close accounting. Not a dishonest man, Kyle had always thought, or not actively one. The kind of person who was careful about small things and careless about large ones, who understood the price of things and mistook it for their value. They had exchanged greetings for 2 years. Cale had repaired his eastern fence twice, which Pell had paid for correctly and promptly. He had been present, Cale realized afterward, in more places than he'd noticed at the time. At the road gate twice during morning training, finding reasons to stand and watch. In the tavern, the evening that Vara had explained the legend, the mountain, the dragon's hoard, the 3 swords, and though they had spoken quietly, the tavern was a small room, and Pell had been at a table closer than Cale had registered. The sword was gone on a Wednesday. Cale came home from a repair job in the late afternoon and knew immediately, not dramatically, not with any theatrical premonition, just the flat recognition of an absence where a presence had been. The hook above the door was empty. He stood in the doorway and looked at it and then walked through the house, because he knew he should and confirmed what he already knew. Door intact, window latches in order, the whetstone on the table, everything else in its place. Vara was not there. The 2 facts arrived in the same moment, and he put them in the same place, which was wrong. He knew it was wrong while he was doing it. knew her better than this in the ways the 2 weeks of daily proximity permit knowing, knew the particular quality of her directness and what it meant. But the thought was in him now, and it was the thought of a man who had learned the hard way that proximity and trust are not the same thing, and that certainty is expensive and occasionally fatal. He sat in the chair by the fire and put his hands on his knees and looked at the wall and tried to be wrong out loud in his own head, presenting the evidence. She had been here every day. She had not hidden her purpose. She had told him things she didn't need to tell him. She had brought back his proof that morning and sat on his floor. It didn't help. Quite. The thought was in him. He didn't go anywhere. He banked the fire and sat in the dark and tried to determine what he was feeling, which was harder than it sounded because it had been a long time since he'd been fluent in that language. It wasn't anger. It was something more tired than anger, something that recognized the shape of loss and had learned not to be surprised by it, which was its own kind of sorrow. He went to bed before it was fully dark and lay in the dark and listened to the wind work at the shutter, and told himself he would do something in the morning, and then did not sleep. The knock came well past midnight. 3 knocks, not urgent, not hesitant, deliberate. The knock of someone who has thought about whether to knock and decided yes. He lay still. He heard his own breathing. He thought about the locked door and the empty hook and the whetstone on the table, and he thought about what it meant to have trusted something and been given good reasons to reconsider it, and what it cost to be wrong about someone and then wrong about being wrong. He got up. He walked to the door. He stood with his hand on the latch for several seconds. He counted them accidentally, which told him something about what state he was in. 5 seconds. 6. 7. He opened the door. Vara stood on the step with a sword in her hands and dried mud on her boots. She was not out of breath. She had been walking, not running. The cold air moved around her, and she stood in it without particular acknowledgement of the cold, looking at him in the way she had of looking at people, direct and patient, and not requiring anything specific in return. He stepped back. She came in. She set the sword on the table beside the whetstone, set it down carefully, with attention, the way you set down something that belongs somewhere. And then she sat down on the floor by the wall, not on the chair, not on the bench, directly on the floor, back against the wood, legs stretched out in front of her, as someone sits when they have been carrying something for a long time and have put it down and have no particular performance left in them. She said nothing. He put the sword back on its hook. He stood in the middle of the room for a moment, and then he went and built up the fire, because it had gone low and the room was cold, and because having something useful to do helped him organize himself into a shape that could hold a conversation. He worked at the fire until it caught properly and threw real warmth into the room, and then he turned around. She was watching the flames. Her expression was the particular expression of a person who is very tired and has stopped pretending not to be, not defeated, not soft, just stripped of the layer of effort that goes into appearing otherwise. He went and sat in his chair. In the morning, while the coals caught again and the room was still finding its temperature, she told him. She had seen Pell. The evening of the tavern conversation, she had noticed him at the road gate during 2 morning sessions after that, had flagged it and then set it aside because suspicion without evidence is only suspicion. And she was a guest in this town through Cale's goodwill and did not have the standing to accuse a neighbor of intention. When she came home that evening and found the sword gone, she had not come to Cale first. She had gone to Pell's farmstead. She had walked up to his door at dusk and knocked. He had answered. She had asked him, standing in his doorway in the failing light, where the sword was. He had denied knowing. She had waited. He had denied again. She had said, without raising her voice. She had seen him at the road gate twice, had placed him at the tavern the night of the relevant conversation, and had found a mark in the frost that morning, the particular track of someone who had gone around the back of the house rather than to the front door, which was not the path of an innocent visitor. He hadn't wanted to return it. He had, in the intervening days, developed a very clear and detailed picture of what the sword was worth to the right buyer, and what the right buyer might pay for it, and he had built around this picture a structure of justification that had the quality of all such structures, internally consistent and profoundly fragile. He had a version of events in which he had done Sailor service by removing an object of extraordinary value from a man who didn't know what it was. He had presented this version. Vara had listened to all of it. Then she had given him a choice. The choice had one option. He had taken it. She put the sword on the table when she came back. Then she placed 4 other things beside it. A written note in Pell's hand, acknowledging what had happened and pledging compensation. 2 witnesses from the neighboring farmstead who had been present when he took the sword and would confirm it if asked. The small carved button from his coat that she had taken as a practical measure in case the note proved insufficient, and the ledger page where he had been working out his numbers, which she set down last. He needed to understand he had no position, she said. Not a threat, a demonstration. Cale looked at the items on the table, at the sword on its hook, at the whetstone where it had always been. You didn't have to bring proof, he said. I know. She picked up the carved button and turned it in her fingers, then set it down again with the small, precise motion of someone putting something exactly where they intended to put it. You didn't have to open the door. The fire breathed. Outside, the first birds were beginning. He said, I thought you'd taken it. She looked at him. He held her gaze. When I came home and it was gone and you weren't here, I put the 2 things together and... He stopped. Started again, with less precision and more honesty. I was wrong while I was thinking it. I knew I was wrong, but I thought it anyway. She looked at him for a long time. There were things moving through her face that were not quite readable. Not because they were hidden, but because they were too real to be performed and therefore had no familiar shape. You thought I took it, she said. Not a question. Yes. She was quiet. The fire. The birds. And you still opened the door, she said. He didn't answer immediately. He thought about the 7 seconds with his hand on the latch. About what the seconds had contained. The exhaustion and the wrong thought and the separate knowledge that the wrong thought was wrong and the decision at the end of it, not grand, not heroic. Just the small, specific act of turning the latch in the dark. Yes, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Not with warmth, exactly, because Vara did not do warmth as a visible expression, had presumably made a decision somewhere along the years of solitary traveling to keep warmth close and controlled where it wouldn't be expensive but with something underneath warmth. The substrate it grows from. Something attentive and without defense, which was the rarest thing he had seen on her face. That's enough, she said. He understood that she didn't mean it as a conclusion. He understood that she meant it as the opposite, as something just beginning to be sufficient. The 2 weeks ended. He noted the day in his head without making anything of it. The agreement had been explicit. Techniques exchanged, obligations fulfilled. The sword was home. The neighbor was managed, the ledger was balanced in every formal sense, every term met, every debt cleared. She had what she'd come for, he had what he'd offered. He sharpened the sword that evening, the old whetstone, the familiar angle, the sound it made against the steel that he had been hearing since before he could name what it was, and she sat in the chair across from him, not reading, not cleaning her equipment, just sitting, looking at the fire, her hands loose in her lap. Her blade was broken. She had no sword. He did not mention this. She did not mention it. The broken top third was presumably still in the frost-stiff grass on the hill outside town, turning slow to rust in the cold. He drew the stone along the edge once, twice. The fire moved. Outside, another clear night, the kind of cold that sharpens everything. The stars, the shadows, the specific quality of silence that means no one else is awake for a mile in any direction. She was still there. He had not asked her to stay. She had not said she would. The 2 weeks was simply over and she had not left, and the door was unlocked and the road to wherever she was going was accessible, and she knew both of these things, and she was still here, sitting in his chair, watching the fire with her hands loose in her lap, and he was not going to explain it in words because words were not the right instrument for this particular truth. He knew this in the same way he'd known, to open the door, not through reasoning but through the accumulated weight of evidence that had become, at some point, something close to certainty. He set the whetstone down. The sword lay across his knees, edge honed, the watermark dark and clear in the firelight. He thought about the bridge, about Davith, about following the right order at the right time and the permanent cost of it. He thought about carrying water in a sieve and the word for it in a language he didn't speak, and the fact that someone had given him the word anyway. He thought about 7 seconds with his hand on a latch in the dark, and the fact that he had opened the door, not because he was sure, but because he was willing. He thought about the difference between those two things and how long it had been since he'd understood that they were different. He thought about how the whetstone was nearly half gone, and how that was evidence. Proof of time past and a person in it, still doing the small things, still maintaining, still present. "You could stay," he said. Not an offer seeking acceptance. Just a fact offered into the space between them, the same way the whetstone was a fact here, worn, real, not requiring anything in return. She was quiet for a while. The fire breathed. "I don't have a sword," she said. "No." A brief pause. Almost dry. A swordswoman without a sword is a complicated person to be. "Probably," he agreed. She looked at the blade across his knees, at the watermark in the steel, the ore from a dragon's hoard, the smith who had understood what he was working with, the 3 swords made and scattered across the world for 11 years of searching. She looked at the whetstone on the table beside him, his father's whetstone, his grandfather's, nearly half gone, still doing what it had always done. She looked at the fire. She did not move toward the door. He didn't ask again. There was nothing more that needed asking. Outside, the frost held across the fields and the road and the low hill where the ancient oak stood bare and dark in the clear night, its roots deep in the cold ground, watching nothing in particular, the way very old things watch when they have seen enough to know that the most important things don't announce themselves. They simply continue, quietly, past the point where they were supposed to end, past the point where ending would have been easier, into the specific small warmth of a room with a fire in it and 2 people who have stopped performing anything for anyone and are simply, without ceremony, present. He sharpened the blade. She watched the fire. Neither of them explained anything. It was enough. There's something this story keeps returning to that I don't think can be said in the plot itself, which is that trust isn't a decision. Not really. You can decide to extend credit, to give someone the benefit of the doubt, to stay your hand. But actual trust, the kind that lives in your body and not your head, is built in silence, in small repetitions, in the accumulation of moments where nothing dramatic happens and no one needs to perform anything for anyone. It's built in a corrected grip and a cup of water passed across without comment. In a door opened in the dark, not because you were certain, but because you were willing. In the difference between those two things and learning slowly, at cost, that willing is enough to start with. Have you ever been absolutely sure someone had betrayed you and been wrong? And when you found out you were wrong, what made you open the door anyway? I would genuinely love to know. Down in the comments. Those are the stories I carry long after the story's over. And if this one sat with you, if something in it felt true, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. There are more stories like this one if you'd like to stay for them.